Hey, Sean.
What's up, Howard Dawes?
Not much, man. You know, here on Coptales and Cocktails, we have lots of different types of guests.
Correct?
We've had guests that are lawyers. We've had cops, of course, right? Criminals. We got somebody today that's kind of, well, he's none of those.
A first.
Yeah, but he was involved in the legal system. So we try to give people a better understanding of the legal system here, especially me, because, hell, I know very little about the legal system, as we have found out through this podcast.
Other than being the victim of a crime in 2021. You learned the system there a little bit.
This is true. But today we have a gentleman named Craig Cameron, who was just a jury on a murder case.
A juror on a murder case. That's a rarity.
Yeah. He didn't even say, yeah, I'd love to be on the jury. I'm waiting to convict somebody. He actually answered well, got picked to be on a murder case jury. And he told me this, and I was like, hey, man, why don't you come on our podcast and talk about this?
Absolutely.
Because I've never had it.
No,
Immediately I had a bunch of questions to ask him, and I was like, oh, hold on. We'll just wait for the podcast.
Perfect place to do it. You know, we have obviously had prosecutors. We've had defense attorneys. We've talked about the process of jurors being picked for court with the voir dire and that type of stuff. I'm looking forward to this. This will be nice. I've had limited interaction myself, obviously, with jurors during trials. Obviously, we can't talk to them out in the hallway or anything like that. At the conclusion of a trial, whether it is a conviction or not guilty or anything like that, then at that point, the actual judge instructs the jurors, hey, you are welcome to talk to the prosecutor if you choose to do so, but they don't have to.
Huh.
And so, I've been in several murder trials and shooting trials and things like that, and it's only been a couple times that we've had a chance to talk with jurors, and it's usually been after one where they found somebody not guilty. So it's the prosecutor more of saying, why did you find him not guilty? What was it that wasn't there for you?
Basically, what could I do better?
Not necessarily what could they do better, because, I had a recent trial where I thought the prosecutor did a fantastic job. I really did. And, still just a not guilty verdict.
Huh.
And it was just more of what was it that, put you over, leaning over the other side, basically, the other way.
Well, Craig's going to be able to tell us that.
I look forward to hearing this. I want to hear about it. If it's a Tulsa murder case,
it's a Tulsa murder case,
then I hopefully will be familiar with it.
Hey, can we have a drink first?
We're going to have a drink. And actually, the one we're going to have tonight is it's something that I think it's called High Bank Distillery. Let me just pull it up here. One quick deal. That sent it out probably says it on the bottle, right?
It says High Bank Distillery.
All right, High Bank Distillery. So they are listeners of the podcast of Coptales and Cocktails.
Thank you very much.
And they reached out through the Instagram, and said they wanted to send us a bottle. And they actually, for the camera that's up there, sent me this shirt. Make whiskey, not war. It is a little bit small, but I look buff in it.
You do look buff in it.
So they sent us their a bottle, and when you're done pouring it, got to take care of Jason as well down here. There's Jason. One more. That's a big-ass pour.
I know. I did it on purpose.
Oh.
Make whiskey, not war.
Make whiskey, not war. All right, so real quick, we'll talk about it. Whiskey War, it's a barrel proof coming in at 116 proof, and they've actually got a little label on it here that says...
don't drink on a podcast.
Yeah, don't drink on a podcast. They won at the San Francisco Best of Class for the World Spirits competition for blended. So look forward to trying it. So thank you guys for sending that out to us.
Hey, Craig, cheers.
Hey, Howard, cheers.
Thanks for coming in. Hey. We want to hear your story.
Thank you so much for having me. Really a pleasure to be here. Wow.
Yeah, that's full grown.
That's big boy whiskey right there.
Yeah, that's fiery on the end.
It is. I like fire, so.
I do too. So, so I know Craig because he is a physician.
I got you.
He's a very particular type of physician. You want to tell us what kind of physician you are, sir?
Sure. I'm a cardiac electrophysiologist, so a cardiologist who specializes in heart rhythm disorders.
So you really
sound like a perfect juror for a murder case. A lot of qualifications there. A lot of schooling.
Lots of schooling. And I can say that the of the doctors that I've worked with in the past, probably in the present, the most intelligent of the bunch and we're not going to tell any other ones that are listening to this, are the EP docs. Man, these guys can stare into the matrix. They're like Neo. They look at heart rhythms and it's like whoa, 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 and stop and go, oh, there's what I need to fix, and they fix people. So he's doing an excellent job out in the world, him and his cohort.
Oh, you're very kind.
No, that's
Howard,
just
you're very
true.
kind.
All right, so let's get into this jury thing. How you got summoned?
I got summoned, yeah. So originally summoned last fall, but as you're aware, we were very busy in the fall with procedures. People meet their deductibles on their insurance, a lot of elective procedures and whatnot. I was able to postpone it until the first week of January. And so the first week of this month, I was on jury duty. And, yeah.
Craig, was this the first time you've ever been on jury duty?
Yes. I was summoned once in Dallas years ago, but was not selected.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Just the process. I mean, I know, you show up on a Monday morning. Mm-hmm. You have no idea, from my understanding. Actually, I mean, I know no idea of what type of trial you're going to be a part of, or even if you will be selected. You're
Correct.
just in a major pool. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's a large pool.
Now, as far as how it gets divided up down there, that I actually, despite being in court for 25 years, basically have no idea how that worked.
Yeah, I think it's pretty random. We report to the basement in the courthouse, and you have with your summons card, you turn it in, and they have your name and all of your information, and then they start gradually, randomly picking groups of jurors to take up to different courtrooms, so they do that, and then you go. There were about 40 of us in the initial pool for the trial that I was selected for. And then they start the voir dire process that you mentioned, where they ask you a bunch of questions and try to determine whether you have any biases that may disqualify you. And then I think each of the attorneys are allowed to strike so many jurors initially.
Correct. Yep.
And then I think the final pool is, again, randomly selected, although I don't know if the judge has any say in terms of throwing anyone else out of the pool as well.
Okay, so you're thrown in with 40 other people, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Tell us about a jury of your peers. What kind of people were in there?
So there was another physician.
Okay.
There was a security guard.
Okay.
There were several dental hygienists, several single moms who were working and expressed their unhappiness with being there and not making money at work.
Kids will wear you out.
Yeah, exactly. Several retirees, one of whom said, I've got nothing better to do, so I don't mind if I get picked. So he was kind of an interesting guy. He was like a 60-year-old hippie skateboarder type guy who was a retired machinist.
Really?
Awesome.
And yeah, he was probably the most interesting person that I met in the process. He was not ultimately selected for the jury, but he had what are those? Is it a one wheel, like the electric skateboards that people get? He had recently purchased one of those, and his thought was that if he wasn't doing jury duty, he would probably be out playing with his one wheel and skateboarding. So he was probably the most interesting.
I like
person
this guy.
met.
Like
Yeah.
Chad Smith in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, exactly.
you and Jason just
With a
drives around
blower.
on his.
He's got a blower on.
He
cleaning the
literally
sidewalks.
does a blower while he's riding a one wheel. He walks his dogs on a dead serious on a one wheel, usually shirtless.
Yeah,
So-
absolutely. Even in the wintertime.
Yeah,
Those are
wintertime.
just fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
So would you say it's a cross-section of our society?
Pretty much, yeah. It was pretty random assortment of individuals. Yeah.
So the whole pool, there were 40 in the group that you were selected to do this murder trial. How many people were in the basement? I want to hear about the sum totals.
I don't know, too many. I
Couple
mean,
hundred?
it's probably a couple hundred people in the basement. It's my guess. Yeah.
Do you know how many trials a week they do?
I don't. I mean, I know the dockets stay stacked. The trial judges typically are going to do one a week, and that's it. So sometimes, Monday is kind of when jury selection. Monday, Tuesday is typically jury selection that'll happen. And, I know they would like to get the trial started typically on a Tuesday if possible. A lot of times it's going to depend on what the trial is. A murder is there's more time spent. There's just more time spent trying to
Well,
pick
there
the
should be,
jury.
right?
Yeah, sure. Because as he was talking about the voir dire process, it can be done pretty quickly. But I imagine in a murder, we'll probably let you talk about how long that thing went on. But I know this last shooting case that I was in, it was a high-profile case, and it went on for, I think, a full day, maybe a day and a half of just voir dire of the prosecution gets to do it, and so does the defense. And they get to, if they choose, I know the defense attorney in the case that I'm referring to, he went through every single one of the potential jurors that were in there and had a full questionnaire for everyone individually. And I don't know if it's different for you, Craig. Sometimes they will the prosecutor might, has anybody here ever been the victim of a crime? And then it allows the jurors to raise, and then they'll go through and go, Craig, tell us about what you were the victim of a crime for, that type of deal. But this guy he had the same list of questions, every single juror. How about you guys? How'd they do it?
Yeah, so so they start off with they go through every single juror and ask you, basically they identify you by name and they ask you what you do for a living, whether you're married or not, what your spouse does, whether you have kids or not. So they go through that whole process, and then each of the attorneys ask you questions, and they did start off with things like, have you been convicted of a crime? Have you been a victim of a crime? At one point they had asked whether anyone had been at gunpoint or had ever, been a victim of violent crime, since we're talking about a murder, obviously. Probably the most unusual question that the defense asked about, if anyone had any experience with playing billiards and cause and effect, and how billiard balls respond to different things and how you hit certain shots. There were a few people who raised their hands.
That sounds like a bad Tinder line. Like, hey, have you ever played billiards?
Yeah.
What about cause and effect? Have you ever seen balls collide? That kind of stuff.
It was hard to tell where he was coming from with that, for sure.
Did it later actually, was there a part of the trial that had to do?
Yeah, I think the reason he was asking had to do with the ballistics involved
Okay.
for the case.
Huh.
Because it was a shooting case.
So this was
Yeah.
a geometry question, huh?
Yeah, I think so.
And basically the point of the voir dire is, and just like Craig said, they want to, both the prosecution and the defense, they want to try to find, identify basically who is biased that would potentially go against their case just from the get-go. And then vice versa, they're also, the prosecutor and the defense, they want to try to identify potential jurors that they think are going to be probably more for their side of the case from the get-go.
Right.
And so that's the whole give and take from both sides, is these questions that they get to throw out, and everybody's making notes. The prosecutor's making notes on the people he's talking to. The defense attorney's making notes on who the prosecutor's talking to, and vice versa. And if there's what we call a case agent, like a lead officer, he'll make notes on this sheet, and everybody has a number. I mean, when you came in there, you would have had a juror number.
What was your number?
Initially, it was 24.
Hey, that's a good number.
Yeah, it is.
That was my football number in junior high when I was 4'10", 78 pounds.
A little
strong safety.
Playing strong safety.
Yeah, strong safety at 78 pounds.
That's pretty tough.
Yes,
Josh Reeser.
absolutely.
And so and so what they want to do is basically they're going to make all these notes, and then once the jurors are out of the room and it's just the prosecution, defense, nobody else is allowed to sit in there, and the judge, and they basically go through and get to say who they want to strike. And and both sides get to strike a certain number of people, and they'll get down to the 12.
To strike?
Well, they get down to 12.
12, right? 12 and two
and
alternates.
Yeah, so there are 12 jurors and 2 alternates. I seem to recall the judge saying that they could each strike 9. So I don't know if
After
they
a quick
then
break,
randomly
we'll be
picked
right
the
back with
from
more
the remainder,
cocktails.
'cause there were about 40 of us in the room.
Gotcha.
I know that. So if what would that be, 22 or something like that to pick from for the final 14?
Were they the single mothers that wanted to be?
Yes, there were none of the women who I recall who were complaining about being there because of work and having those responsibilities were selected. I don't know if that was factored in. There was the young woman who was sitting next to me at one point basically said she didn't feel like she was capable of deciding the fate of another human being.
Yeah.
So she was not on the jury.
Nope.
Gotcha.
No, we don't want those.
Right.
Our system shouldn't want
Right.
those, I should say.
And I'm glad she wasn't, because
Yeah.
I think that would have probably impeded the process. So she was definitely not there. I don't remember anybody else. I mean, the final 12 of us, there were, the other physician was picked. So there were 2 physicians on the
What
jury.
kind of physician was he?
Anesthesiologist.
Did he just read a paper the whole time?
What's that?
Did he just read a paper or magazine the whole
Yeah.
time? Anesthesiologists are known for just bringing in like periodicals during the cases and just reading away and then pushing some drugs.
My gosh, I should not have been a policeman.
No, she was actually very active in the process,
Okay,
and
good, good.
one of the leaders of the whole the decision making that went on once we went into deliberation. There was a retired nurse that was picked. The security guard was picked. I don't know what some of the other people did. There was a real estate agent. I can't remember what some of the other people. There were 6 men and 6 women. It was evenly divided in that regard.
So you guys did this all on Monday, and then Tuesday you're ready to go, or did it take Monday and Tuesday to get it done?
Yeah, so Monday was the voir dire, which was just selecting the jury. So at the end of Monday, I knew I was going to be a juror on the case. And then Tuesday was, opening statements, and presentation of all the evidence occurred on Tuesday. And then Wednesday, we had closing statements, and we deliberated, and the case was done by around 6 p.m. Wednesday.
That is a fast murder trial.
It was a fast murder trial.
Now,
That motherfucker
So-
did it.
well, put it this way: this shooting case, the guy didn't die, and we went a whole week. So, let me ask you this. Obviously, we want to get into the nuts and bolts, of this case, and
Yeah.
I want to hear about the deliberation process and what you guys evaluated. And I'd love to hear. Was it right away? Everybody's like, "Yeah, this dude's guilty." I would love to get into all that. So let's kind of break down what was the synopsis of the murder.
The synopsis of the murder. Okay, so the murder took place in the fall of 2020, it took place at an after-hours club at 63rd and Peoria.
Oh yeah, lovely area.
Uptown Lounge, Uptown Club. Are you familiar with that?
Yep.
So as I was learning about
I want to say I'm
Yeah.
familiar with it from a
Yeah.
law enforcement standpoint, not from what I like to do on a Tuesday night.
I used to
Right.
bartend
So
there.
yes,
Right.
Jason used to dance there, but
Right. So so apparently I found this out after the case. There have been, I think, a number of
shootings there.
violent acts and shootings at this club.
Yep.
The shooting occurred around 2:45 in the morning. The police arrived about 10 minutes after the shooting, and they found the victim laying in the grass in a little grassy area between the parking lot and Peoria. Took him to the hospital, and he died at the hospital. And so initially, from people who worked at the bar, they received a nickname for a suspect and who was probably involved. And then I guess a tip sheet went out the next day, and one of the patrol officers recognized the name and went and found him. And so the shooting, initially the police thought that it took place outside, but it actually took place in the club. And there's a lot I can tell you about that in a second. But
We
yeah.
need to rewind. What was the nickname?
Memphis.
Memphis.
Memphis was the
Okay.
nickname. Yes, and the officer I think was Michael Fulbright. I think was the patrol officer who recognized the name. And so he recognized the name. He thought he knew where the suspect was living. He was living with his sister. He goes to the apartment complex. There's one way in. There's one way out. He asks one of the residents if he can watch from the upstairs window. And basically, he observes the guy going in and out of the house, basically putting suitcases in a burgundy Cadillac. And he calls along the same timeline. He calls for backup and has basically other officers waiting to arrest the guy as he leaves the complex. And so, the shooting takes place at 2:45 in the morning. They have someone in custody by around 7 o'clock that evening.
that's incredible.
That's
good police work. Hey, if you watch the show, the first 48, those
Correct.
first 48 hours, man, that's what's important. So
So they had I think they had his nickname, and they also had a picture. They had a photograph, and he also had the suspect had some distinct tattoos, I think, which
Yeah.
also kind of identified him.
right.
So while this is going on, the homicide detectives, the club in question sits between a dispensary and a convenience store.
Which that's not too hard to do in Tulsa. We have lots of dispensaries, lots of convenience stores.
Right, and these places have cameras,
Yep.
obviously. So there was camera footage from outside which identified what happened after the shooting. That was a big part of the evidence that was presented.
So you couldn't say it wasn't there.
He initially did say that in questioning. He did say that he was not there. He waived his Miranda rights and said he wasn't there initially, and then admitted to shooting the victim. But he maintained that he was provoked. He was holding a revolver for his. So let me back up.
Yep.
Let me back up. The defendant had gone to Uptown Lounge to watch his nephew rap.
Memphis.
Went
to see his
to watch his
nephew.
nephew
rap.
perform music, rapping at
Sure.
the Uptown Lounge. So while he's there, at some point he gets hungry. Well, back up. He he's holding a revolver for one of his nephew's friends.
Was he a convicted felon?
Well, we don't know that at this point, but later we do find out. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So they don't tell you as part of the deliberation process. You're not supposed to know their past crime history and whether they're felons, and so they don't tell you that until afterwards when it's sentencing, when you're deliberating sentence.
I gotcha.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
let me back up.
Yeah.
Did you know you were going to be on a murder case, though? Did they tell you that?
They told us that in the voir dire process.
Gotcha.
They tell you who the defendant is and the basic outline of what he's been accused of.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So anyway, so he has gone to watch his nephew perform. He's holding his nephew's friend's revolver. At some point, he gets hungry. He goes outside. He goes to a food truck. He gets some food. He comes back in. He's trying to eat his food, and the victim's name is Sean.
Not me.
So Sean is apparently kind of being drunk and stupid. Keeps putting his hand in the defendant's face, trying to shake his hand, which I don't know if we can talk more about that in a second. The defendant did not want to shake his hand,
Okay.
kept trying to move away from him. This is what he maintains. This is in his own testimony to the homicide detectives when he's questioned at the station. Anyway, at some point they butt heads. When the defendant is getting up with his food, he butts heads with the deceased, and then there's a little bit of a scuffle and a standoff. The deceased swings at him, ends up in front of him. The defendant maintains that he was reaching into his pockets for what the defendant thought was going to be a gun, so he pulls out his gun and shoots him. That's what he confesses to in the during the interview with the detectives.
Now,
Yeah.
during the trial, were you guys able, I'm assuming you guys were able to see the full interview. They probably showed it to you guys.
Yes.
So you get to see the audio. I mean, you get to hear the audio, also see the video because it's recorded.
Correct.
Was there video of the fight/shooting that happened inside the club?
No, there was no video. There was no video footage from inside the club.
Okay.
There were no witnesses who came forward who said that they heard a gunshot or saw the shooting.
What a shocker.
I know.
You're kidding me.
At the Uptown Lounge?
It's a common problem. Listen, I'm going to applaud the Tulsa Police Department for this. So our homicide solve rate here in Tulsa is in the 90 percentile. I mean, it's literally like in the low 90s. Nationwide, I think the average is like 40%. Yeah, and you get some of your larger cities that have a lot of crime problems, it's lower. So numerous obviously I give a lot of credit to the detectives themselves, to officers like you pointed out, they're Fulbright, that, gets a street name, knows who it is, and is able to go and find this guy when it sounds like he's packing his bags to leave town. But the lack of witnesses that come forward, even victims of crimes that still won't come forward and testify and cooperate. I mean, that is one of the biggest problems for law enforcement, trying to stop and solve violent crimes. Because typically we'll have an idea of who did a crime or who's involved with it, but without those witnesses that typically will come forward, or a confession from a suspect, like in this case, it says, yeah, this is what happened. That's why they're unsolved. That's why they and the police get blamed. Hey, you guys aren't out here trying to work this case. You're not trying to solve it. It's like when you've got a guy who shot in front of 65 people
And no one says a
and
word.
nobody says a word. What are we?
the hell you gonna do?
How
Yeah.
what are we supposed to do? Sorry. So go ahead.
No, absolutely. So yeah, so no one so of the witnesses who testified. Actually, it was kind of interesting because only the prosecution called any witnesses. That was it. And there were about 6 or 7 witnesses who testified in this case. One was a woman who was working the door at the time at the club. She saw the defendant and the victim engaged in what she described as a scuffle. That's what she saw, but she did not
Scuffle.
a scuffle.
Okay.
She did not. She didn't see anyone shot and didn't hear a gunshot, but it was a scuffle. Then the medical examiner was one of the other witnesses, and then the rest were police officers. And there were the first 2 officers who were on the scene. Officer Fulbright testified, and then the homicide detective, I think Mark Kennedy, was his name.
It's a very good detective.
He's been on. He's like 30+ year.
Forever. Yep.
Very good witness on the stand.
Yep.
Yeah, testified very well. So that was, I think it's pretty much everyone who testified. There was, however, video footage from outside I mentioned earlier. And so we watched the video of the interrogation, and we also watched a video where you see around 2:45 in the morning, you see a man run out of the bar across the parking lot into the grassy area and collapse. Dark figure. You can't tell much about him. He's wearing a big dark coat and whatnot. And about 3 seconds after he leaves, another man pursues him, wearing clothes that look very much like what the defendant was wearing when he was arrested.
Where was the gentleman shot?
That was interesting as well. So he was shot in the back of the right deltoid region. There was a small entrance wound, probably like 1 or 2 centimeter entrance wound in the right deltoid. And the initial patrol officer who arrived on the scene, like I said, she arrived about 7 to 10 minutes after he had been shot. She was what she described as raking the body, trying to find basically a source for the injury or the bleeding and why he was hurt, and she really couldn't find much. And he didn't seem to be bleeding to death or anything like that. And then another officer arrived with paramedic training and took over for her, and then the victim was taken to the hospital and died. So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to ask, so was it just I don't know if this even came out in the trial, if you know the answer. Was it basically a small caliber wound? You had a point of entrance and it never came out? Was she, I mean, when you talk about, she can identify blood looking, I mean, one of those that kind of bounces around inside?
Funny you should ask, yes.
Oh.
So, yeah. So
You're the doctor. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so the medical examiner described the entrance wound, which I just told you about, and said that the bullet then entered the chest between the second intercostal space, which is the space between the ribs, and it worked from right to left and from back to front.
Oh.
So it was weird, and also it hit the scapula. So I think this is why the billiards question came into play. Mm-hmm. Because one of the arguments for the defense was that the victim, when he was shot, had his arm outstretched, use your imagination, maybe holding a gun.
Right.
And so he gets shot into the, back of the deltoid. It bounces off of the scapula into the chest. It went through the right lung, through the aortic arch, and ended up being free in the left pleural space.
Which, for non-medical people like myself, what is that?
So basically what it has done is it has pierced the right lung.
Yep.
It has pierced the aorta, which is the largest artery in the body.
Correct.
So you
We pump blood through there, right?
A little bit.
A lot of blood. All of the blood goes through the aorta. So
how often does blood go through the aorta?
Well,
how many liters per minute are going?
About 5 liters per minute.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of blood.
At rest. His was probably even more so because of
the adrenaline and running and
yeah,
yep.
Exactly. So anyway, so we don't know the caliber. It was never really mentioned in any of the testimony. I would assume it was a small caliber and bounced around. That would be my assumption.
Yep.
As well, because the entrance wound was small and it just seems to have behaved that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so rewind a little bit. Why is a club open till 2:45? All the clubs, I tell you, all of them close at 2 around downtown.
And they usually kick you out by about 1:30.
Right.
So by law, they have to close at 2 o'clock, but they do what's called after-hour private parties that allow them to stay open later. A lot of these things are illegal, honestly, but that's the common thing. I'm not insinuating your victim nor suspect in this case or gang-related or anything like that. However, I know that particular area. I know there's a lot of gang-related problems down in that area, but we do have historically had a problem with after-hour clubs throughout Tulsa that are quote-unquote private parties, so they're trying not to operate under we are a bar and stay open later, and we have a lot of problems like shootings, homicides, things like that.
Which makes sense. So this guy got up, headbutted this guy. He was drunk, right? He was trying to shake his hand.
Yeah.
He was messing with him while he was eating.
Yes.
And so they got in a scuffle, and he shot him.
Basically, I mean, yeah. So the main points the main points that the defendant made were that he was trying to remove himself from the situation, that he was eating, he didn't want to shake his hand, even though the victim repeatedly tried to do so. They bumped heads, whether incidentally or whether this was like an act of aggression, I don't know. He said that the victim threw a punch and missed him, and ended between him and the door, and was fidgeting in his pockets, possibly for a weapon.
Gotcha.
That was his story. Now, interestingly, so the interview with the detectives starts with him saying he wasn't there, he didn't do it, and then he goes through this elaborate description of what happened inside the bar. And then at the very end of it, he kind of leans back and he kind of goes into gangster mode, and he says, "What if I didn't do it?" And Detective Kennedy's like, "We're not playing that game."
Yeah.
So that was that's a summary of the interview. The victim did not have a weapon on his person when he was found, or there was no weapon recovered from the body. He did have drug scales, I should say, on his person.
The victim did?
The victim had
Okay.
drug scales. Toxicology was negative for any drugs, but his blood alcohol level was 0.22, so almost 3 times the legal limit.
He was drunk.
He's pretty drunk.
Getting his drink on. We might be that by the end of this show.
Yeah, that's pretty stout.
And he, so the defense also contended that there was a period of time when friends and family of the victim were around his body. They might have removed a weapon. They might have removed.
Why didn't he take his
drugs.
scales?
I don't know. I didn't take the.
Yeah, didn't want those.
Yeah,
huh?
didn't want the scales apparently.
All right, so you're presented with all this, and I must say that defense attorneys are kind of jackasses, right? They'll ask you a bunch of questions, or they're pretty hard on cops and witnesses, right?
My personal experience was like that.
Honestly, I felt like this defense attorney was fairly laissez-faire. Like, he didn't do a whole lot. He came after Kennedy at one point on a couple of issues, which Detective Kennedy handled really well. But he wasn't too bad. There was a lot of debate about what does it mean to have been shot, the way that the victim was shot. Was he pointing a gun, or was he
Turning away
like this? Like, I don't think anyone can really say for sure what was happening when the victim was shot. But no, I don't think he wasn't a jackass, I wouldn't say.
All right.
Yeah.
So they present all this.
Yeah.
You guys head back into the jury room. What happens then?
Yeah. So first there's a big collective sigh,
Yeah.
because now you can talk about this case. The last two, yeah.
And through the process, you guys have notepads. You can make your notes and all
Correct.
these type of things, correct?
That is absolutely correct.
It's provided to you.
That's absolutely correct. So they give you you have a notepad and pen. You take notes during the process, and the notes stay in the courtroom. They never leave with you, and they're destroyed after the court case as well. And then so the other thing's kind of interesting. So there were some exhibits that were entered into evidence during the case. We can't see them. There's pictures of like blood on the ground and the body from the medical examination and things like that, which we were not allowed. We didn't actually see those until deliberation. That was kind of weird. That was not what I expected.
Right.
Really, in terms besides listening to the witness testimony, there were just the 2 videos that I mentioned. And so we get back to deliberate, and first, we're all sighing and happy that we can finally talk about this, because in each of the recesses, you're admonished not to discuss this with anyone in any way, shape, or form, each other, or your spouse, whoever.
Admonished is a big word.
It is a big word. He's a doctor. He's a doctor. He knows these type of things naturally, even without being part of the system. But just to kind of follow up on that.
Yeah.
So what happens if whether it's a witness or a prosecutor or a juror, you talk to somebody out there, and he gets reported to the judge, they will basically call juror number 12 or whatever your number is, one-on-one, or just without anybody else in there. And the judge is going to question you in front of everybody. Hey, did you have a conversation with this person out there? What was it about? That type of thing. And it doesn't matter how far into a trial, if a judge determines that, there's been, this juror's been corrupted or something like that, to that, it will be a mistrial, and they will throw the trial out, and we'll have to come back to another date. The whole process will start back over. That's how serious it is. And the other side is, if somebody, whether it's a juror who's going out there and sharing information, or somebody on the prosecution or defense that's doing it, you obviously can be found in contempt of court and then be legally in trouble as well.
Right.
So that's how serious it is.
Can you have your cell phone?
No.
Nope.
No, you,
You can't be
can't.
taking
No,
selfies.
Well-
hey, I'll tell you the fastest way you want to get your ass in trouble in a courtroom is be anybody in that courtroom. You're someone sitting there watching the trial. You're a juror. You're sitting there, have your cell phone go off. Find out how
don't
fast
play
you can
that.
piss a judge off. Dead serious.
There are signs everywhere that say, well, so during the actual trial, you can have your cell phone in the room, but you have to have it turned off.
Gotcha.
So you have to have it turned off. When you go to deliberate, they take
I have
your
to go to the
cell phones
restroom,
and
so
your
we're going to plug
smartphones
in a
and
commercial
everything,
right here.
and you have no contact. Even in communicating with the bailiff, you have to write notes. You're not supposed to talk to the bailiff at all if
Gotcha.
you need anything. We had AV issues, so our only communication with the bailiff was trying to reload the videos because there were a couple things we wanted to look at when we were deliberating. You were talking about the other thing that was really impressive in terms of keeping you from talking to people you shouldn't. There's a lot of crowd control going on because the jurors leave the courtroom at a different time than the family members for the victim who, they were there. The family members for the defendant, they were there. So they're all leaving at different times. There was one of the family members for the defendant was a little agitated one day, and there was someone in the hallway directing him away from us so that he wouldn't talk to us. But yeah, we were not compromised.
So is there a foreman? Is that the popularity? Who's the most popular
Yes.
on the jury?
Yeah, so you do pick a foreman. When we went back to deliberate, the anesthesiologist was very organized and had already come up with a little algorithm. Because before, so this is the other thing. Before you go back to deliberate, they read off all these instructions to you, and it's the most boring part of the trial. And you're
It's
just
horrible.
like, it's awful. It's
It
really
is
awful.
horrible
Yeah.
for everybody involved.
Oh, it's so bad. The judge reads.
How
these
long is it?
Long.
It's long, and she jumps from point to point. So you're like point number 16, and the next thing you know, it's point number 45, and you're glazing over. Now, fortunately, when you get back to the room, the deliberation room, basically there's a handout there that has all these points on it that you're going to refer to. But so it's a first-degree murder trial. That's what he was charged with. There are 4 elements to first-degree murder, which I can talk about in a second. If he's not guilty of first-degree murder, then we have to decide if he's guilty of first-degree manslaughter.
Okay.
So the first question is he guilty of anything at all? And then which of the 2 crimes do we think fits best?
And you decided he was guilty?
We did, actually. Yeah.
And you decided he was guilty of?
First-degree murder.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What was the as far as the deliberation when you guys got back in there? Was it pretty quick? I mean, like, was everybody on the same page? Was there debate whether or not this person did or didn't do it? Self-defense? Is it first degree? Is it something lower?
Right. So there were the 4 elements of first-degree murder. There's a human being dead. The defendant's actions caused the death. You think it was unlawful, meaning you don't think it was self-defense. And there was what they call malice of forethought. So that means you intend to kill somebody.
Right.
And that's kind of what people think of as the whole premeditated
Right.
thing. But malice of forethought can be formed in an instant. So there's it's not like you have to plan for weeks in advance that you're going to kill somebody. or
Right.
to be
I'm going to
first-degree
headbutt
murder.
him, turn him, shoot him. That
Right.
Kind of stuff.
So based on the data that we had before us, pretty clearly someone was dead, and we thought the defendant had done it because he confessed to it during the interview. So really, the 2 points we had to debate were whether we thought it was self-defense and whether there was an intent to kill. I think about 10 of us got to the first-degree murder pretty quickly, and there were 2 that were less sure. The things that swayed us and made us lean more towards first-degree murder. Well, first we had to decide, was this self-defense? We didn't think it was self-defense based upon the actions leading up to what led to the shooting. There didn't seem to be enough there to cause any of us to feel that lethal force was needed in this case. There was no weapon on the deceased that was found. The victim was able to run across a parking lot and collapse in a grassy area. I think if I'd had a gun in my hand, somebody shooting at me, I probably would have shot back if I had enough energy to run all that distance. So that seemed to me not to make a lot of sense. When we went back and watched the 2 videos, there were 2 things I think that kind of swayed us. One was that during the video footage from outside the club, I mentioned earlier that you see the one dark figure run across and collapse. 3 seconds later, somebody's following the defendant, obviously. He seemed to be kind of skipping and kind of strutting and kind of this alpha male pose, like I got you, mother, kind of like I
Right.
don't know, like think Denzel Washington Training Day kind of
that's a great
activity,
movie.
you
I
know.
like that.
It was on TV
So,
last night, actually.
And he had in his hand this white object, which appeared to be like his food from the food truck.
He
So-
didn't even put it down.
Right. So he's so afraid for his life that, you know, he never dropped his food. I mean, he runs out with his food in his hand after he shot this guy. So that didn't sit well with us in terms of being self-defense, you know, or being a, you know, kind of crime of passion, first-degree manslaughter kind of thing. And then also during the interview with the homicide detectives, he said, you know, that the victim was fidgeting, and what was going through his brain was, what was going through Memphis's brain was, either you're going to kill me or I'm going to kill you. That's
Right.
what he says. I quote, "You're going to kill me or I'm going to kill you." So there's an intent to kill
Sure.
based upon what he says there as well.
How long did you deliberate? And what'd you have for lunch?
We had cookies.
Cookies for lunch?
So
You can have whatever you want. You had
So
cookies?
Tulsa
our-
County Courthouse.
Our judge was very sweet, and she made us cookies.
Really?
And so there were.
Who was it?
It was Dawn Moody.
Don's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Dawn, yeah.
She used to be a prosecutor. I mean,
wow.
I've known her back when she was a prosecutor.
Yeah.
Husband, his name's Chad Moody.
I
He's a-
know Chad.
Yeah, so I mean, I've known both
Yeah.
of them for years. So yeah, it's been actually neat to see, you know, her progress up to you know, being a judge. So
How were the cookies?
Yes, they were great. They're fantastic.
Yeah.
We actually commented after the trial that if she ever wanted a second job, she could go into baking. She could start a cookie operation. I'll
Howard,
support
have
it.
you ever had Howard's food, by the way?
I've heard he's a good cook, but I have not.
Fantastic, I will say,
I make
fantastic,
cookies. Not for jurors, though.
fantastic.
Different scale. So how long did you guys deliberate?
A couple hours, I think.
Right? You go
Yeah.
back. You go back. You go in. The guy stands up. You say, "Yeah, we find
Yeah.
you guilty."
Yeah, I think So I think we went back around 12:30 or 1, and we probably around 3 or 4 decided guilt, and we came back out. Maybe it was 3 hours that we were back there. It took a little while to load all the videos and watch everything, and go around the table a few times with our votes or whatnot. And our foreman. So you asked earlier about foreman selection, which
Right.
I think I kind of got sidetracked and didn't ever answer you. When you go through voir dire, you give all this identifying information about yourself.
Right.
So the anesthesiologist was very organized, and I suggested that she be the foreman, or foreperson, I guess, if you will. And she was like, "I don't want my name on this thing." And so there was another man in our jury who had managed apartment complexes in that area and dealt with like gangsters before. And he
Problems.
was like, "I don't have a problem with this. I'll put my name on it."
Yeah,
Gotcha.
And so he signed it,
That's
and you go back out and you read the guilty verdict. The judge gives the foreman the option of reading it, or the court will read it for him, and he actually read it to his credit. Yeah.
And then from there you go, and are you laid over for a day for sentencing?
So this was all Wednesday. So closing arguments and deliberation, it all ended on Wednesday. So it was really weird because we read the guilty verdict, and we were told that we would have to decide on sentencing also. And the guilty verdict has to be, as I'm sure you know, obviously it has to be unanimous. These both have to be unanimous. But what was weird was we go back to deliberate, or actually we go back to the deliberation room, and they kept us there for a while and didn't really tell us what was going on. Well, so what was happening at the time was that there was also a weapons charge, felony in possession of a weapon that went with this case, that for strategic reasons they had put off, and so that he pled guilty to that while we were waiting.
Gotcha.
So then they come back out and they tell you what your sentencing, options are. And by this point, it's getting to be like 5 o'clock in the evening, something like that. The sentencing was either life or life without parole. And you could also levy a $10,000 fine. That was the sentencing that we could place. Life without, for the purposes of parole, it's like a 45-year with 85% required. I
yeah, it's
think.
like 38 years basically.
Yeah,
They're going to
38
serve
years,
38
basically.
till they're
You're gonna
eligible.
Serve 38 years. The defendant's 31 years old. None of us really felt strongly about the sentencing, and so we sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. And we didn't see the point in levying a fine on his family that they would have to pay probably.
So his criminal history, obviously, if he had a felon in possession of a firearm, which is a felony charge, he obviously had a felony criminal history before that. Did they tell you what his felony convictions are for?
So that was weird too. So so during the murder trial, you don't know any of that, obviously,
Right.
as I mentioned earlier.
And sorry, Craig, to cut you
Yeah,
off.
yeah,
The
go
reason for that is they don't want you as a juror being biased.
Right.
Exactly. You go, man, this guy's a
Right.
piece of shit. He's been in trouble all these years. And I'll say, even on the gang side of things, we can't even introduce somebody, or we can't say they're a gang member. You could have a guy sitting there with all these face tattoos and everything like that. We cannot tell the jury that he's a gang member unless the motive for the shooting or the homicide is gang related. So if we're trying to articulate in the trial the reason this shooting happened or the reason this murder happened is because these two guys are rival gangs, they shot at each other. But there's other hearings that go on prior to the trial, prior to a jury even being in there, that the judge has to make a decision if we're going to even be able to talk about that. So that's how much they really try to protect keeping the jurors
Right.
unbiased, basically, on who somebody is.
Right. So yeah. So you don't know the criminal history until you start deliberating sentence. So before we go back to deliberate sentence, they tell us that in August of 2019, the defendant had a felony possession of a firearm, which means there was another felony before that one. So this is the third felony now that he's being charged
He's
with.
stacking those up.
He likes guns.
Right. What was weird though is they didn't tell us what the other felony was. And so after the trial, as Sean mentioned earlier, you're allowed to ask questions to the judge and the attorneys and the police officers and anyone who's around who wants to talk about the case. You can discuss it. And she told us that it was a possession of a controlled substance, which is now considered a misdemeanor. So you're not allowed. It was a felony at the time, which gave him the initial felony firearm possession charge. But now it's no longer a felony, so we didn't hear about that.
Well, killing somebody is definitely a felony.
Right.
Yeah, that's a no-no.
Right.
Let's, Craig, we got just a minute or two left.
Yes.
So now that you've been through the process,
You can ask the same question I am.
well, hopefully it is. So that we've only got a minute or two left. But, now that you've been through the process as a juror, I think obviously there's a lot of debate about the criminal justice system, blah, blah, blah here in the U.S. It's not perfect, of our courtrooms and things like that. I think it's probably the best that there is on the planet, even though it's not a perfect deal. From being a part of the most, the highest level of crime there is, being a homicide, what is your thoughts on it? The whole process from the investigation, even though this one wasn't lengthy, to just the way it's presented in the courtroom, the juror process and all that.
I thought it was a good experience. I mean, I generally don't want to do jury duty because I'm busy. I have other things to do with my time, like most people, and I really went into this not wanting to do it. But I enjoyed the experience. I'm glad it was a short murder case. I was asked earlier whether I'd ever want to be on like the George Floyd trial, and I want no part of any high-profile, lengthy trial. But this was a good experience, and I think, as you mentioned, I think it's the best system that there is, and I think it was pretty fair. And I feel like, we had a very good jury. Everybody worked together and was very reasonable, and it was very thoughtful discussion and conversation about his guilt on each of the points, and we tried to be systematic about the elements for the crimes that were put before us as well. So I thought it was a good experience. There was the thing that's kind of weird. There are a lot of questions that come up in the course of the trial that you as a juror want answered, but you can't ask the questions.
Right.
So you don't have some information, and that came up in our deliberations as well. There were the two people who probably had the hardest time committing to the conviction they didn't like the uncertainty of not knowing what went on in the bar. Was he really scared? Was he really defending himself?
Right. Too empathetic to that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, we're almost running over, and I apologize, Howard. But that's the whole point of it is, like you said, you look at the jury, the instructions that they read you, you look at the elements of the crime. The whole process in this as a juror is you are supposed to take emotion out of it. You're supposed to strictly look at the facts that are presented in the courtroom. And you're not going to hear everything that went on. You're just not. There's things that aren't allowed to be said in the court. The judge has made a decision or some other legal reason that certain things never get to come out, pieces of evidence, that type of stuff. But based on testimony, evidence, that you hear in the court, you're supposed to leave your emotion out of it and look at the facts that are presented and make a decision whether it's guilty or not guilty.
Well, we have presented a nice infomercial for being a prospective jury member today. I think that it's been positive for Dr. Cameron over here.
Yes.
I think that it went well for him. The outcome was well, so we're happy on this side. You're happy on this on that side. Win-win, right?
Yeah,
Justice was served.
This was great. So, Craig, thank you for coming in here with us.
Yeah, it's a good perspective just to have somebody in to explain
No,
the
it's something
process.
different. Love
Hell,
it.
I knew nothing about damn jury duty except you didn't want to go do it.
Yeah.
That's all I knew about.
Well, I
it.
know
So,
if I ever were to be selected, I would hope it'd be for a murder trial or something like that. I'd hate to get stuck on some civil trial or something. That'd be just
dude,
miserable.
I'd say shit to get out of it for sure. Well, that wraps it up, Craig. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. It's been a
we love
pleasure.
it.